right. So I think in terms of my presentation today, I'll be taking you through just some general high level what we're seeing in the market at Kiteworks. I'm a senior sales engineer there. I've been there about 4 going on 5 years. I'm based out of Raleigh, so I'm local to Olive by PNC. So short commute for me. And it'll be somewhat around zero trust, but some other things we're noticing as well. And the title of the presentation that we have is tackling risk gaps in the compliance era. And I'll make my Taylor Swift joke. We titled this before her Iris Store. I know everyone's probably saying Taylor Swift, but there you go. So in terms of the confluence we're seeing, right? We've kind of gone through this progression, right? Where we had IT going from mainframes to personal computing to kind of expanding to the clients and servers, enterprise computing, and then the cloud, right? And it started off on the cybersecurity front. It was as simple as just implementing passwords, and the most popular password back in the day was just admin. I think in some cases it still is. But expanding to your first malwares, your computer worms, viruses, and hackers, and now we're in the advanced persistent threat era with nation states and things of that nature, right? And where we're seeing those kind of converge is everyone's favorite term, compliance, right? So we're entering the compliance era. So I'll kind of take you through what we're seeing from a data protection and legislation perspective globally, and then just kind of get more microscopic from that perspective. So in terms of worldwide, right, there's 71 countries with legislation around data protection and privacy, right? There's 9% with draft legislation and then 15% without, right? So it's starting to get more and more prevalent. And if you take a look at just the United States alone, we've been on this journey for 20 plus years, right? I imagine some of you are familiar with one, if not two, if not all of these different logos, right? There's HIPAA, there's FIPS, there's GDPR, there's more focused things government related when it comes to NIST 853 and 171, and development, and most recently CMMC for all you government contractors out there. It's a huge buzz term that we run into on the Kiteworks side, but you can kind of see how much compliance has grown, and I think it's only going to continue to grow given all the developments as of late with artificial intelligence and things of that nature. And getting even more granular, right? The state laws, California has its own iteration of GDPR with CCPA. Colorado, Connecticut, Virginia also have signed their own individual privacy acts. And then there's a bunch of others that are active bills that are being kind of pushed through. So you can kind of just see it's a worldwide kind of, not epidemic, but worldwide thing that's going on that's kind of pushing down through the countries, through the individual states even. And it's something that we certainly have to address. This next slide always makes me laugh. This is an IDG survey that was put out. And it was just on factors determining security spending. And the reason it makes me laugh is one of the categories was best practices. And I think obviously the fact that it's only 49% is pretty funny, but I don't know who wouldn't vote for security spending on best practices. But you can see coming in hot at number 2, compliance or regulations or mandates are kind of top of mind for most people, and even going down, right? There's a lot around security incidents that either happen to the organization or happen to organizations that you either partner with, supply with things, or do business with, so to speak. And what's at the center of compliance, more often than not, it's data, and data can come in the form of it can be structured data in databases. It can be semi-structured with logs and emails that have some structure around it, but also some unstructured data. And then you have your unstructured data, which is files and email data. And there's a million acronyms out there that describe the different types of data you might be running into. Some of the most popular ones are PII, PHI, IP, but as it pertains to like CMMC, running like CUI and FCI and all these different acronyms, but really it's just different ways to describe the sensitive data you care about, right? And regardless of all those different logos that I showed you previously, right? The center of compliance it always remains the same, right? You're always trying to protect, you're trying to track, and you're trying to control the different acronyms, the different data that you're concerned about, right? And this is something that permeates across all industries. It's something that you see everywhere, even if you're working at a company that doesn't necessarily do business with the government or do have a lot of intellectual property, right? You still have employees, you still have legal departments, you still have data that is sensitive that you need to secure. And one of the growing challenges is we do a great job in zero trust, which I'll get to, is a great framework around securing your own environment. But what happens when that data needs to move, right? What happens when you need to share that data with other people, with the people you do business with, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the problem that I'll kind of get into throughout the course of today. And your content, right? It's mostly in the form of semi-structured or unstructured data. But that's what needs to move, right? And it needs to move to third parties. So one of the things we did is we performed a survey, surveyed over 780 IT kind of security risk compliance professionals in 15 different countries. And one of the top takeaways was organizations, one is that 75% of organizations indicate their measurement and management of sensitive content communications need improvement, right? And 62% experienced financial damage as a result of an attack on sensitive content communications, right? So people know that this is a problem, but it's not easy to address, right? And that can be for a multitude of reasons, but it's often you have multiple ways to share data, you have multiple employees, you might have a shadow IT problem where they can share anything they want. And it just becomes really hard to kind of control all that. And that's something that we can kind of get into how Kiteworks can help with, but also just something that other tools can help with as well. And so according to Gartner, data-centric security will be key to a data everywhere world. So really hammering home that it's not just about securing your networks, it's not just about securing your applications, but it's about securing your data as well. And this is according to Kiteworks, the CRO or a CMO of this thing, but data-centric compliance will be the key to the data everywhere world. So jumping into next is just some of the gaps that we've noticed in some of the compliance, which I've kind of foreshadowed here a bit. But the first one is centered around third-party risk management. So in terms of third-party risk management, I think a lot of people here are either in sales, they're sales engineers like myself. They deal in some capacity with vendors, right? And different, I mean, a lot of us are vendors in some cases. So me being a sales engineer, I have to do these security questionnaires, right? I have to show that we are complying with XYZ regulation based on who I'm talking to, right? And they have to go through these assessments, make sure that the people that you are doing business with, whether they be suppliers, their vendors, their customers, other law firms, they are secure and they have securities in place. You have to do this due diligence, right? But there's, as we'll get to, there's a gap in this, right? So one thing we noticed is in terms of just where the cyber risk management cycle is going, is there's a really large focus on dynamic risk governance, right? So taking that focus from just securing your networks, implementing firewalls, implementing encryption, classifying data, you really need to look at your supply chain, look at third parties, right? And look at the digital risk associated with those. One of my favorite slides is this next one here. It's a little outdated. It's from the 22 data breach report, but it talks about all the top threat vectors, right? Intrusion vectors, right? And on the chart on the left, you can see how over time system intrusions are just kind of skyrocketing up. And then the chart on the right, you can see the top vectors, right? You have all this security in place, but the place where you're actually getting hacked or people getting into your network is through partners, right? So it's something that you put all the security in place, but it's something that sometimes you can't necessarily even control because you share data, right? And then your partner is the one who leaks it out. This is just kind of talking about the vendor onboarding and kind of risk assessments I talked about previously, like, are they accessing data? What systems can they access? What security controls do they have in place? Show me your incident response plans, your business continuity plans, disaster recovery, like all these different things. With focus questionnaires, whether it be a SIG or a SIPMA or something of that nature, right? And then you analyze the findings, you maybe give the company a risk score, right? And kind of determine how you're going to do. And I'm not going to say it's a useless step. I mean, maybe as a sales engineer, I don't like it, but it definitely does its part in identifying, hey, this company needs to get better, or maybe we should do business with them if they aren't necessarily secure. But there certainly is an additional step that I'll point this to here in a second. So in terms of the NIST cybersecurity framework, which is a framework centered around securing not only your systems, right, but your assets, your data. The left side of the pyramid here is just kind of your internal, your first party ecosystem, and the left is your third party. But the way NIST sees the world, right, it's to implement this framework, you need to identify your systems, your assets, your data that are sensitive, right? And there are security tools like a Varonis even that can help you classify and secure that data, put protections around them, right? There's a million tools in that box, right? And then how do you then detect, respond, recover in the event there is a breach or something like that, right? And we do a great job at securing our own ecosystems, right? But what do we do on the third party side? And the answer there is fuzzy. There's some things we do to identify those assets and things of that nature, but there's not a lot that we do to protect and detect, respond, recover. And so circling back on that vendor slide, what we propose is you can close that kind of gap by adding encryption, adding digital rights management, controlling your zero trust principles at the content layer, not just looking at your application or your network layer, but really focusing on the content layer itself. And so with that, mentioning zero trust, that's a good kind of pivot into the zero trust piece of this. So yeah, I mentioned before, right, we were going to talk about zero trust specifically. And zero trust, right, it's a lot of things. It's inherently not trusting, right, who you do business with. And that's from a user perspective, that's from an application perspective, that's from an endpoint perspective, right? And you're trying to identify the users, right? Maybe do multi-factor authentication, make sure the user is who they say they are, right? Have always on monitoring, make sure that these applications are constantly secure, constantly being checked, and the users are doing what they're supposed to be doing, right? And in terms of just organizationally, like CEOs and C-level executives, 80% cite zero trust as a priority in their organizations. I know it's a focus of this chapter. 94% are implementing zero trust strategies, and then 80% of organizations plan to implement a strategy in less than 12 months, right? So everyone is focused on this, and I think generally we do a great job with this, right? And so this next slide, it's from Gartner, but it's all about securing your own environment, putting zero trust around who is this user accessing my application, my network, making sure they are who they say they are, and then making sure the data in that application is secure, it's tracked, controlled. But the question we propose is, what happens when content needs to move through those applications, outside those applications, right? That's where the risk gap lies. So again, this is a repeat, but data-centric security will be key to a data everywhere world. So this is kind of another progression slide, I think, from Gartner that just shows how you can progress to becoming and implementing your zero trust strategy. So again, it's all about user application segmentation, segmenting workloads, but we also recommend user to content segmentation.
Ask if there are any questions.
Any questions so far?
So pretend I know nothing about zero trust other than trust nobody. Am I able to implement zero trust in my environment today with the tools I have in my environment? Or do I need to get a third-party tool like your vendor or pick your vendor to actually implement the zero trust environment in my environment?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think.
Repeat the question for the recording.
Sure. So the question was, and I'll try to not to butcher it, but the question was basically, how do I implement zero trust in my own environment? Do I need a Kiteworks or some of these other applications? Basically. And I think the answer is, you might already have some applications. Like I think a big part of zero trust is implementing identity access management tools, specifically like single sign-on, your Azure AD, your Office, and then having two-factor authentication, I think is key to one, with all the applications that you leverage. Like I think everyone here probably uses a different kind of tool stack, so it's hard to comment on what's secure, what's not. But first and foremost, if you have sensitive data in an application, you want to make sure that people that can access that application are the people, right? So that's the first piece. And then you have to worry about the application itself. So the application itself becomes a little more difficult. Some tools will have security in mind, some tools may not. And a lot of tools are on the web, right? So that's where things like CASBs come into play, where you can say, hey, you can't go to, like, hey, you can't go to Dropbox or Google Drive or whatever, some application you deem not secure, right? You can't go to your Gmail account to share content, right? You have to go through your corporate email that has encryption and all those things. So it's kind of a roundabout way, but I think there are applications that you can implement, which are on the screen here, that do kind of different things in terms of like CASBs can kind of monitor your internet applications and what you can and cannot access. You can put in firewalls and things of that nature. So I think there are definitely applications that you can implement. But I think the big first step is making sure you have single sign-on, things of that nature set up. And me specifically, I wouldn't call myself the best person to ask on that. Like I'm focused on a specific application, so I am biased, but I think there are applications that you can deploy to get the zero trust. And I think what we propose in terms of our application, right? What we call our platform, it's a private content network, and I can get to what we do in a minute, but it's basically, hey, I need to share sensitive content, right? And I need to share it with people, whether they be suppliers, vendors, partners, outside of my network, right? And it's a platform through which you can share content that's encrypted, it's tracked, controlled, and you can put policy around it, right? So you can say, hey, this is view only. Hey, this is tagged as sensitive, so it has to go to Shankar to approve it to go out, right? And even you can take it a step further, which we'll get to in a second, where I'm a shipbuilder and I need to share a CAD drawing of a part that I'm working on with General Dynamics, right? I can share that part in CAD, allow someone to edit it in an edit-only container, but they can't download it and take it with them, right? That's digital rights management. So you remove the onus of being saying, hey, take this CAD drawing, put it in your network, which I have no idea if it's secure or not, download it, do whatever you do, and send it back. You can just say, hey, I'm going to share my content with you. You can edit it in my platform, and then you go on your way. You can take the content. So that's really where we come into play. We address that problem of, hey, I need to share sensitive content, and I need to do it externally.
So I just yeah.
One way I would like to clarify is that your question, there's also defensible network. And the difference between DNA and zero trust. Zero trust has got a policy. It is that
So can hold on. Can hold on.
DNA is about actually authenticating that the person's coming in from the right place, into your network, properly authorized, and then get to the application. You do that without zero trust. But that's the key, you're not gonna, I can bring it up, it's the application side, getting the application to understand, say, this user can make that decision. Zero trust comes in when you, after all that work is done, to say, I want to make this money. I can't figure it out, I don't want to have the time to do it all. Figure out my policies. So the thing is, that's one of these problems with zero trust is that too many people go right towards the policy. You have too much work on the front end and back of the gap before you can ever get to zero trust.
Thanks, Ken. I think I was trying to answer, give you a very short answer to your question the question was, do you really absolutely need tools to enforce zero trust? I believe zero trust is more about, zero trust architecture is more about architecture than the tools. Tools could help, but I think you should think more about an architecture which can comply with the zero trust principles, and some of those principles you may need tools to enforce it.
So next is the segue into digital rights management, and I think this slide is funny. Like, what is it? What is it not? So my CEO thought he was funny putting in Napster. I think that was a little prior to my time. I think I was a LimeWire guy, and I definitely ruined my computer or two of my parents downloading music. But I think the point being with this, like, digital rights management kind of came up as a topic back in the day, right? Because all these Napster, LimeWires, all these tools came out where you could just upload any music and anyone could download it, right? And it became something about enforcing copyrights, right? And since then, it's kind of developed into a bunch of different things, but it's still kind of the same, right? You're still trying to control, protect your data, right? And track who gets access to it, right? So you're still trying to put control around data. It's just not focused on specific music and copyrights anymore. It's focused on everything, right? It's not an industry specific thing, right? And so this is the definition of digital rights management as it pertains to Gardner. And it's really just about solving security and compliance challenges, and putting in a data-centered defense, right? So that content-defined risk policy that we've mentioned previously is, again, key here. And so there's three kind of critical elements to this. There's a cryptographic element, where the information is encrypted, so it travels with the data no matter what. There's an identity element, so users must be authenticated, right? This kind of ties in zero trust piece. You need to say you are who you say you are. And then in terms of policy, right? Like, what can you do with the content once you get access, right? It's not just enough to say, hey, all right, you're Charles Ellis at Kiteworks, you can access this, right? Maybe I want to make it view only or edit only, or I want to disable printing, or I want it to go to the compliance officer for approval, right? It's not just enough to say, hey, you have access. There needs to be different kind of workflow involved in defining what users can and cannot do, right? And for the most secure data, you probably just want to keep it as view only, but even just having edit only is a huge kind of step up. This is just another kind of slide on this, and it's just really focused on the policies of EDRM and what's that associated with. And I think in terms of this slide, it's all about so it's one thing to say, all right, I know what I should do with this data, right? And I'm an end user, and I want to say, hey, I know this is sensitive, so I want to make it view only. But it's another thing having a Varonis or having some of these other tools that can dynamically classify your data, right? Say, hey, this is sensitive based on the fact that it has social security numbers or an ITAR export control number, whatever it may be. Being able to enforce that via policy and set that from the top down, is huge. So that's kind of where the DRM space is going. It's not just about being able to encrypt and password protect the file. It's about encrypting data, allowing people to access it in the way they need access, even allowing for editing. And then being able to enforce that policy based on a tag or who a user is to say what they can do or what they can't. In terms of why today's approach is lacking, right? A lot of the traditional DRM tools out there have a cryptographic element and the encryption travels with the data, but it's all based on having like an agent installed where that agent needs to go in, find your data and apply encryption and apply these passwords, right? And it kind of doesn't scale well, and it also doesn't really work well when the file has to leave a network. So that's kind of where a tool like Kiteworks can come into play. And with that, I do have another kind of slide getting into like artificial intelligence and stuff like that, which is the kind of the belle of the ball lately, but I'm happy to pause to, and one, does anyone have any questions for me on what I've gone through to this point? I'm also happy to show you kind of my solution or our solution, right, what we do, and then I can even do a quick demo if you are interested, but
Yeah, I encourage you to do the demo.
demo.
Let's wait. Are there any questions before Brian starts his demo?
So you said, I can go back to the slide where the policy engine really showed up,
Probably one.
the slide where exactly the policy
one.
engine. Can you tell about those policy engine, set up the rules you configure, non-public product?
Sure, yeah, that might be good. Me actually, yeah, that might be
That
good.
probably-
Just showing you kind of what's available. I actually have to.
Is it like a least privilege and no perimeter security controls, those kind of rules?
Yeah, so it's a couple different things. So in terms of the policy you can set up in our application, right? It's all centered around. There's kind of a couple different pieces, right? There's the user. And then there's the content, right? And there might be a group that those users are in, but it's kind of how those all play with one another, right? So a user might be on the legal team, right? And they might have different access than a user on the sales team or whoever, right? But then I think the really cool space that where we're going, and let me just,
Start share.
yeah, I'm just gonna switch my sharing here. And I'm gonna click through demo that just kind of, I can send out some of these after if you want to click through this on your own. It's actually an easy way to go through it, but it has information like, so this is just talking through the NIST cybersecurity framework, right? But if I jump in here, we have a policy builder that essentially says, all right, this content is tagged, right? And it could be tagged using a Ronis or using a Microsoft, right? It's something that we want to be able to offer in our platform as well, but also recognize that data exists out of our platform, right? So if the data is tagged this way, right, then what happens next, right? So who's the user, right? Is it, do I want to tie it to a specific user? Do you want to tie it to a profile? So that's what gets back to having user groups, right? Is it a specific email domain I want to deal with? Or is it any user, right? And then from there, being able to set policy around what can be done on access, right? So, all right, this data is tagged as sensitive. This user is on the legal team. Therefore, they have access to it, right? Because they're on the legal team, they didn't access it. But you can also do things like save view, which is sharing something in a watermarked only environment, right? Where you can't upload, you can't download, you can't edit. You can also apply safe edit, which is sharing something in a watermarked container where someone can go in and actually edit the content, right? But they can't download it or take it with them. So that's kind of what this specific demo walks through. So it's a little squished on this, but basically you can come in, you can see the policies enforced based on the flag or the tag that's been put in place. Right, and I can actually come in and use safe edit. And what happens is it opens in a watermark container in AutoCAD, and I can make my updates, save them back, we'll track who's making the updates, the version history. You can see it's watermarked with my information, my email address, the time I'm accessing, et cetera. But it's not just view only, I can make updates and save it back to the folder. And then obviously everything's tracked, controlled, and logged. But in terms of what the platform does holistically, on top of just that policy automation, being able to share, let me just reshare once more, and I'll show you. But basically,
For clarification, like we're showing your demo, it's based on folder location, not necessarily application. So when they on your AutoCAD, the application being your activation, you're looking at say policy based on folder, those files, like say, you're focusing more on files, let's say, do an application.
yeah, so the
So like you wouldn't be one for say, use the word, policies, so they requirements get policy. You're doing it more based on folders that have access. Sure.
Yeah, so the question was, what are you applying the policy on, right? Is it individual folders? Is it applications? Is it things of that nature? So in terms of the Kiteworks platform itself, at the end of the day, it is a secure file sharing platform, right? So the problem we help address, I'll circle back to your question here in a second, but the problem we help address, right, is I have sensitive content that I need to share externally, right? And you might have one tool that does this well, one tool that doesn't do it well, one tool that's secure, one tool that's not secure. But at the end of the day, you often have multiple communication channels, 10 plus maybe, that people are using to share content, right? It becomes really difficult to track. There's no control over it because there's multiple applications, because all of different systems, and some of them might have weak security, right? So what we offer is a platform through which you can do all of these different things, right? You can go to a web-based portal, you can type up an email, send emails securely, you can create folders in that application, right? Share folders out externally through that. And then there's the concept of managed file transfer, which is kind of like a buzzword term that people use for different things. The way we see that is more of like orchestration, or I need to schedule the movement of content from point A to point B, point C, right? So to answer your question, in terms of the policy you can set up around the content, it's really, it goes back to that slide in my previous presentation where you have these other kind of tools like locking down and saying, hey, you can't share out of any of these applications but Kiteworks, right? And then we would be the means through which you can apply encryption policy, et cetera, sharing process, right? So you could read the tags that you set up in Microsoft or Varonis or whatever, and then apply policy based on the content you bring in the system. So you can apply policy to specific folders in Kiteworks, but you can also apply policy to specific users. You can apply policy to specific data tags. So I think the most robust way to do it, and I think a lot of people are kind of at the beginning of this journey in terms of classification. I think it's getting more and more popular by the day, but being able to tie it into a specific tag and have that reference the user as well. You could set policy to say, hey, this is intellectual property. It can only be shared out by legal counsel or whoever, right? Or it can only be shared in a equal capacity, things like that. But at the end of the day, we have a platform that enables you to share sensitive content, right? So just to show you like what that does, right? I can share out one last time here. But in terms of like what the actual platform looks like, I've thrown around a lot of security terms, but it's really just a web-based platform, right? Where you can share sensitive content in an intuitive way, right? It's not rocket science or anything of that nature. Just let this load up. It's that also slow just slow here, but so I can log in, talking back to Zero Trust, you can integrate with your single sign-on tool, you can do multi-factor authentication. But in terms of sharing, right, we can have integration points with your different repositories, right, and check files out of these applications and bring them into Kiteworks. But in terms of just being able to share content, right, I have my own Kiteworks application, I can create folders, I can share content with third parties, collaborate, things like that. So in terms of end user adoption, what the platform actually does, it's very intuitive and easy to use. It's meant to be more of a secure way to share content than some of the applications you might be familiar with.
Like Dropbox and Google Drive.
So the question was, is it like Dropbox or Google Drive, which is a great question, I think. Yeah, I mean, people always ask us like who our main competitor is, and it's hard because we do compete with a Dropbox or a Google Drive or a OneDrive or Box and just file sharing, right? But we're not just file sharing, right? We have capabilities to do email encryption, we have managed file transfer, do automation. So the idea is more holistically, this can be a tool where you can consolidate all this different disparate systems and not just do file sharing your folders, but do your encrypted email, do your automation, things of that nature. And then have one audit log source of truth for all that, have one policy that you can set from the top down. So it's meant to secure all those channels, but yeah, stacking up one for one versus one of those applications, we would just be positioned as the more secure option.
It does encrypt the data on transit.
Yeah, data is encrypted in transit and at rest. We scan all files for viruses. We can integrate with data loss prevention, advanced threat protection tools, CDR tools. I've kind of talked about the policy extensively in terms of the policy you can set up, that everything is tracked and logged in real time. We have dashboard where you can consume that audit trail. There's different compliance reports around the CMMC, if anyone cares about that. That's how you can do from that perspective.
So your network is, we're storing the data in the SAP platform.
Good question. So he asked if the data is stored in the SaaS platform. So the way Kiteworks is deployed is it's a hardened virtual appliance that can be deployed anywhere, right? So you can deploy it on premise, you can deploy it in your cloud, or we can host it for you. It's not technically a SaaS, but it's not, I mean, it looks like a SaaS. It's basically like a SaaS. You just have to kind of manage some of the like software updates and things of that nature. But we have a FedRAMP authorized solution. So we do a lot of work with the federal government or anywhere there's sensitive data for that matter. But in terms of deployment, yeah, you can deploy it anywhere. We have deployments in like the DoD and like Cybernet and like really high top secret environments where they're air gapped off the internet. Any other questions? Sorry, I'm losing my voice over here.
Are you done with the demo? Or you want to? Are you done?
Yeah, I think that's a good like high level overview.
Okay. So if there are any questions, go ahead. Otherwise, we have to. Okay.
For your air gap locations.
Oh.
What do you do in terms of things for like updates?
Yeah, the question was for the air gap locations, what do you do for updates? So there's offline updates that we can send, and if they can either send over email and upload that way if it's very secure, put it on a hard drive and log it into whatever base or wherever they're working and upload it that way. But yeah, there's offline updates that they can apply that way. Well, thank you all for your time today. I'll be around during happy hour, but it's great being here. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. So we have, I think, 45 minutes more. You know, I'm sure there's still a lot of drinks and food out there, so we'll disperse at 8 o'clock. Thank you. Thanks for coming.
Thanks. And it's like also like bring really help in that scenario.